I know that there's going to be a lot of things that'll come up that might be troubling for you. You see, because not everybody who's watching is in agreement. And this is what I say. Do your homework. Do your own research. Dig into it. Find out if you're really correct or not. The internet now has some tremendous resources. And for those who want to know more about me and question my credentials, I would say go to Google. Google my name as it is there. There it is, lays it out. Google Scholar has all the publications I've made. And if you have access to ProSite, then Google that, and then you have more information about me. But believe me, my degree is genuine, and my experience is fairly extensive. So anyway, do your homework and learn what you can. You know, this is the key issue. The key issue. We can debate, I suppose, about bones and other things, but you know what that means in Latin? Ex nihilo nil fit. And it translates thus: out of nothingness, nothing comes. This is a concept from the first week, and we're in the fifth and final week, by the way. In the first week, we talked about, can you get anything from non-existence? We're not just talking blankness. Doesn't exist, and you make existence. That is fundamental. As creationists, we have no problem. Genesis 1:1, in the beginning God. That's it. God's not physical. He's totally other than. And by the way, when you make comments, don't insult the Lord, okay? He's not the sky guy. I would caution you against that, seriously.
I don't think anybody here does that, honey. Nobody here does that.
I'm not talking to you guys. I'm talking to those guys.
That's true.
All right, so there's worldview models. This one came up before. And in terms of the worldview model, there are three. The one on the left shows God with an up and down relationship to the world. This is the Judeo-Christian view, where there's an interaction between us and God, where God is personal to us, where God cares about us, where God is close to us and hears our prayer, where in fact we would say he's immanent, that is to say he's right here, and also throughout everything. The Judeo-Christian God is both transcendent and immanent. When you talk to most people and they say, well, I believe in God, you have to then further question, which God do you believe in? Which one? Do you believe in the second one here? I believe in God, but there's no arrows going back and forth. This is simply God as a being who has no interest in you. You could say, well, that God, the one in the middle, he made us and then forgot about us. That is deism. And deism is what I consider to be atheism light. Atheism light. Because you acknowledge God, but it doesn't make much difference. The third one, God, question mark. God is neither transcendent nor immanent. This is the view of secularism. We're not even sure there is a God. Well, you have to answer that first question. Where does being come from? Does it simply come from nothing? Does existence come from non-existence? You know, why is this important? It's important because Genesis is fundamental to Christianity. If it wasn't for the fall of Adam, the entire redemption story would not be needed. But Genesis tells us who we are. And it tells us about our relationship to God. The question sometimes comes up, would we know God if there was no Bible? What if we were on a desert island? What if we lived in a time and space or place where the news of Jesus never came out, or the news of God never came out. Could we know God independently of Scripture? And Romans 1:20 says, "For since the creation of the world, God's invisible qualities, his eternal power and divine nature have been clearly seen, being understood from what he has made, so that men are without excuse." Without a Bible, we see what God has done. There's no excuse. God is also just in how he deals with people in that situation. I don't know, but there's no excuse for saying, I don't know that God is. We have to ask questions. Where does beauty come from? And the world is filled with beauty. And what's amazing to me is that God is extravagant in beauty. He puts beauty at the very bottom of the ocean where no one's ever going to see it unless somebody dives down and says, wow, what a beautiful creature. When I walk through the Grand Canyon and you see the rocks that have been polished and you see beauty, he puts beauty where we would think is wasted. God wastes beauty because that's who he is. Because God himself is beautiful. Everything he creates is beautiful. So we have to say, where does beauty come from? And who are we? Why are we here? Those two very important questions, by the way. That's ontology and teleology. The first one is question of being. Why are we here? No, who are we? Being. And why are we here? And you know, I told you a long time ago about the Baltimore Catechism. A catechism is a Q&A way of teaching children. Question one. Question one. Who made you? Answer. God made me. Question two. Why did God make me? To know, love, and serve him in this world and to be happy with him in the next. And here, 70-some years later, I still remember that answer. And when we look at a spider web, did you know that there's different stickiness? That some strands are not sticky, but some are. And the spider knows to walk on the non-sticky ones. But of course the flies that get caught, not too bad for them. But there's a difference in stickiness in the web. And how does he know to make the web? How does this happen? You look at birds that fly across the ocean. They go thousands of miles across the trackless ocean with only the stars to guide them. And they find their way there and back again. Beauty, instinct, tremendous wonder in this world. And to me, that speaks of intelligent design. Not random chaos, but an intelligence that made the creatures for a purpose. And it says in Genesis that God made us in his image and likeness. In his image and likeness. And people have puzzled about that for a long time. God's spirit, yes, and we have spirit. But I think of it like this. We are persons. You know, when you get right down to it, we're persons. And only a person can make a person. Follow? Only a person can make another person. So the image of God is his personhood. Well, that's my thought on the matter. So there's two histories that we deal with. The first history is the neo-Darwinism evolution, which starts with a single cell and goes all the way up to primates. And by the way, it doesn't start with that single cell because you got to get to the point of making DNA. Yeah? That's a little bit of a problem. A little sticky wick, as they would say. DNA is extremely complex. And we talked in an earlier session about how difficult it is to simply make a primordial soup and hope for the best. But we have two worldviews. You see, on one hand, we got the worldview of gradualism. Single cell becomes complex, becomes primate, as opposed to, and the best illustration I have is Michelangelo's creation of Adam. And I used that image a number of times. But that's the two differences. One says gradualism from a cell to a fish, to whatever, to finally end up with a primate. And creation says, in the beginning, God. So I unapologetically say, in the beginning, God. Now, this is a very, very interesting one. This is a sequence of events. All right? And I have a couple of things pointed out here. First of all, notice the copyright date. 2010. This isn't from 1890. This is 2010. Notice the other thing. It used to be the ascent of man. Well, can't have that anymore. It's now the ascent of woman. Look closely. And, okay. So it says the ascent of woman. We even got woke in terms of our, evolutionary design there. And notice this also. The four hominids to the left of the woman, the modern woman, these are now extinct. We have no evidence of them except maybe some bones, which we'll talk about in a minute. And finally, bottom gives the book where it's from. It is still in publication. Now, I used to teach high school biology. I did that for 10 years and went on to university to teach and all that. This design always troubled me. I said, really? Is that what you think? And I think, I don't know about that. That design troubles me. I'll tell you more about that. So as you look into this, evolution, the theory of there, is filled with frauds and forgeries. They wouldn't do that, would they? Apparently they did. And I look at this little girl. Yeah, kind of cute. And the problem is, we send our kids and our grandkids off to school. And they hear only one thing, over and over and over again, until there's no debate, there's no question. They say evolve, evolve, evolve. They hear nothing else. And what does the Lord Jesus say about those who cause a little one to stumble? Better they should what? Well, to tie a millstone to the neck and cast themselves into the sea. Well, you don't cause little ones to stumble. And I need to show you, and I will in a minute. So the school, okay, creationism is suppressed and mocked. Because if I say to someone, I'm a creationist, and they say, well, you believe in Adam and Eve? Well, yeah. But they say that as if it was a pejorative. As if that was a terrible thing to believe in. Do you believe in Adam and Eve? Yeah, I do. So we need to take a look at Lucy. And I don't mean I Love Lucy, and not Lucille Ball. You all remember I Love Lucy? Yeah. Gosh, yes. Okay, I Love Lucy. But that's not the Lucy I'm talking about. I'm talking about Lucy, the fossil that was claimed to be proof positive of our evolution.
Natural history museums everywhere display lineups of ape-to-human icons that supposedly show how humans evolved from ape-like creatures millions of years ago. After the icon named Artie, which evolutionists placed in the 4 to 5 million years ago time slot, the next ape-to-human icon is Australopithecus afarensis, with the leading specimen named Lucy. Check out this short BBC video about Lucy's kind, narrated by Lucy's discoverer, Dr. Donald Johansen.
We now have 400 specimens of Lucy's species, Australopithecus afarensis, named after the Afar region.
But did they really find the hundreds of complete skeletons like those shown in the video when they say, we now have 400 specimens of Lucy's species? Actually, no. All they really have are just 400 bone pieces, and over 30% of these are just teeth. The entire collection is barely enough to display on this picnic table. To create the Lucy icon we see in museums, they took hundreds of bone pieces found scattered over a 9-foot area and glued them together to make 47 skeletal parts. Even though they sifted through 20 tons of sediment covering a 160-foot area, they only found about 20% of her bones, if you count hand and feet bones. And they didn't find any of those, except this tiny finger bone. There's no way to tell if all these bones are from the same creature, and they recently learned that at least one of Lucy's bones actually belonged to an extinct type of baboon. While this vertebrae didn't even belong to Lucy or her kind, it's still included in Lucy's displays all over the country. They believe Lucy was an adult female that weighed 55 to 65 pounds and stood 3.5 feet tall, right about the same size as today's chimps or bonobos. After gluing these hundreds of bone pieces into 47 parts and creating models of what they think Lucy looked like, evolutionists came up with some surprisingly human-like creatures, with most models even including complete hands and feet, even though they didn't find Lucy's hands or feet. Most Lucy models even include eye whites, which no apes have, except for some that have a small rim of eye whites. This sure exaggerates Lucy's human-like appearance in museum displays and books. Lucy's complete head and skull are shown in museums and school textbooks across America, but all they found of her skull were just a few brown pieces here. All the rest is, well, imagination. As leading paleo expert Dr. Leakey noted, Lucy's skull was so incomplete that most of it was imagination made of plaster of Paris, thus making it impossible to draw any firm conclusion about what species she belonged to. Interestingly, her skull matches up quite well with a modern bonobo's, which is a pygmy chimp. Lucy's brain was just 1/3 the size of a human's, making it the same size as the average chimp's. Paleo expert Dr. Zuckerman said that the Australopithecine skull is in fact so overwhelmingly ape-like, as opposed to human, that the contrary position could be equated to an assertion that black is white. Evolutionists claim that Lucy supposedly walked upright like humans, but how could this be true when her spine entered the base of her skull at an angle, just like chimps today, putting her into a hunched over position, and her face was just as sloped as chimps today. So even if she tried to walk upright and look down, she'd be looking at her nose. Chimps can walk upright, but only for short distances. Our spines enter into the middle of the base of our skulls at a relatively straight angle, so we can walk upright with ease, turning our heads as we walk. But in both chimps and Lucy's kind, the spine enters more toward the rear of the skull and comes in slanted, forcing her to walk hunched over so she could see where she's going. Skull scans of Lucy's kind have found another big problem with the idea that they walked upright. They found that her inner ears resemble those of African apes today, and were more like chimps than modern humans, leaving even evolutionary scientists to admit her kind was best suited for facultative bipedalism, or walking occasionally on 2 feet like chimps do today. They've also discovered their wrists, hands, and fingers were quite ape-like, even by ape standards, and were best suited for swinging in trees. Lucy had a locking wrist system for walking on all fours. This locking system included ledges and notches that are classic features for knuckle-walking apes and are not found in humans. Next, on to Lucy's feet. One of the most profound stretches made by evolutionists involved Lucy's missing feet and the Laetoli footprints that were found 1,000 miles away from where Lucy was found. Remember, they didn't even find Lucy's feet, and all the foot bones they believe are from Lucy's kind can fit into a small lunchbox. But this doesn't stop natural history museums from showing Lucy walking around with perfectly human feet and claiming that Lucy's kind made the footprints, even though they widely admit the footprints look exactly like a human's. Just how was Lucy, or her friends or cousins, supposed to make these footprints when they look completely human, with some of them over 10 inches long? That's a size 9.5 shoe, and a person that was likely 5 feet 9 inches tall. Remember, Lucy was only 3.5 feet tall. Even if these footprints were made by a massive male of Lucy's kind that was 5'9" with huge 10-inch feet, that's 65% taller than Lucy. How much sense does that make? Especially when males and females of Lucy's closest look-alike today, bonobos, are about the same height. That's putting some big human-looking feet on this little creature. It sounds more like the human footprints were made by humans, and the dating timeline is off, way off. They also found 13 fossils in that region which they classified in the genus Homo that looked human-like. So, if the footprints look unmistakably human, and human-looking bones were found closer to the footprints than Lucy's kind, wouldn't it make more sense that the footprints were actually made by humans? In fact, they just found anatomically modern human footprints in Western Crete that dated to 5.7 million years old. The article states, at approximately 5.7 million years old, they are more than 1 million years older than Ardipithecus ramidus with its ape-like feet. This conflicts with the hypothesis that Ardipithecus is a direct ancestor of later hominins. These human footprints predate both Artie and Lucy. It sure seems like the ape-to-man story doesn't line up with deep time, with these footprints dating to a time before upright walking was supposed to happen. It's more likely that these ape-like creatures died in Ice Age flooding just thousands of years ago. So, to recap, Lucy is based on hundreds of bone pieces glued together to make a fragmented skeleton of about 20% of her bones. She was pulled out of 20 tons of sifted dirt over a 160-foot area. She was the size and weight of a chimp or bonobo, had a brain the size of a chimp, and inner ears for balancing like a chimp, not walking like humans. And somehow, after she's paraded around in museums and school textbooks for 20 years, they find out that she has the vertebrae of an extinct baboon and locking wrists like other apes. Today, scientists are still arguing about basic things, like even her gender, publishing articles like Lucy or Lucifer and Lucy or Brucey. Just a few years ago, CNN reported on a study that showed Lucy most likely died by falling 40 feet out of a tree, traveling 35 miles per hour. So what's this little ape that was supposedly walking upright doing 40 feet up in a tree? That's ironic. Yet, when millions of students every year see Lucy in museums and textbooks, she is shown with complete human-like hands and feet, human-like eyes, and walking upright with human-like gazes and poses. Sometimes, they even remove Lucy's hair, trying to make her appear even more human-like. There's a whole lineup of secular paleo experts who have similar concerns about Lucy. Dr. Oxnard in the Order of Man wrote, Australopithecines are now irrevocably removed from a place in the evolution of human bipedalism. All this should make us wonder about the usual presentation of human evolution in introductory textbooks. Dr. Herbert says that his fellow paleoanthropologists compare the pygmy chimps to Lucy, one of the oldest hominid fossils known, and finds the similarity striking. They are almost identical in body size, in stature, and in brain size. So, just what was Lucy? Lucy and other Australopithecines are extinct apes, just like many other ape species that have gone extinct. She walked on all fours, ate the foods that apes eat, and lived among other animals that are like those that live around apes today. Is there scientific evidence that supports the Bible's account of
Okay, it goes on. There's more, but I'm going to... So anyway, what do you think about that? Well... Okay, so let's talk about a very famous fraud called the Piltdown man. Anybody ever hear of that guy? Yeah. Now, in all fairness, he is acknowledged by all camps to be a fraud. However, he was they had a portion of a skull, a jawbone, and a few teeth. This is 1911 to 1912. The rest of his skull was imagined. You get into a lot of trouble when you imagine parts, huh? The rest of his body and lifestyle was also imagined. So if you start with a little bit of this skull, a little bit of jawbone, you imagine the full skull, then from that you imagine the rest of the body, and from that you imagine his lifestyle. You keep building and building on this. However, 1953, okay, 1953, something like 42 years after he was announced to be a fraud, he was declared a hoax. Charles Dawson, one of the biologists of the time, he was identified as the perpetrator of the fraud because he wanted to prove evolution. And like I said, the Piltdown man is not now included in any biology text. So I would be misleading you if I said he is still being declared. However, there's Nebraska man. Not to be outdone, we have our own prehistoric man. Now, what do we know of him? What we know of him is based upon, and I don't believe this sometimes, a single tooth. A single tooth. And it was declared that it was 100% anthropoid and belonged to a higher primate. One tooth. And then they started to make drawings of Nebraska man. Now you can see it there on the left. And what his world was like. And this is a classic case of excessive imagination. And whose tooth was it? Whose tooth was it? Here in Arizona, we know. This is a javelina, the bane of our gardens. A javelina. There are javelinas all over the place. The other day, there was something like 20 right down in the parking lot. A javelina tooth was then identified as being an anthropoid ape. All right. Haeckel's Ontogeny Recapitulates Phylogeny. What is that? This theory is that in the developmental process, the embryo, whether it's our embryo or a fish embryo or amphibian or whatever, goes through similar stages so that you could say that at a point in time, we had a little tail. And that, if you look at the diagram on the far right, you can see there's, a pig there. He's got a little tail. Well, of course, we know they do. But anyway, this was discredited as early as 1915. Okay? Discredited in 1915. And yet, in Dr. Spock, you remember Dr. Spock? He mentions it. Modern biology textbooks, including the one I used at Penn Hills High School, included it. Current textbooks are still referencing Ontogeny Recapitulates Phylogeny. And here's a list of some of them. All right. They're still, if you look closely at it, you can see the publication dates. They're into the 2000s in some cases, I think. Late 90s to 2000s. So they're still including something that was discredited in 1915. It fits the narrative, you see. That's the whole point. It fits a narrative. And if you did a photocopy of a current textbook, you'd see something like this. The only difference is it's colored. They colored it in. But this is what you would see. Why? Okay, what I'm going to present next is guaranteed to put evolutionists' hair on fire. Guaranteed. I'm going to do this now because the next thing I'm going to show you is the Neanderthals. Now, who were the Neanderthals? Well, they were discovered 1856 in the Neander Valley in Germany. But here's the thing. As opposed to Lucy and the Nebraska man, we have full skeletons. Why do we have full skeletons? Because they ceremoniously buried their dead. You see, there's a certain human quality about burying your dead, as opposed to just letting them die out in the woods or field and someday finding a bit of a skull cap. So the thing also is, not just that, but that they were fully capable, because of their genetics, of reproducing with modern humans. I'll tell you more about that in a minute. These were post-flood people, and they were hunters. They were migrating hunters because they went for, well, where's the food? Well, the food's not a big, hairy guy. You moved along with the herd. But nevertheless, the accepted narrative, and we saw that, the accepted narrative is that Neanderthal is some kind of subhuman grunting caveman. He's the one who gives us the popular idea of what a caveman's like. But thank God for forensics. Let's apply a little bit of forensic science to this. And the examination of their skeletons and their caves tells a different story. It turns out They were very intelligent and capable people who had modern traits of language, art, funerary practices, compassion, and a family structure. They lived in places like that. And by the way, if you're a nomadic hunter, a cave is a good place to live. It's already there. You already have shelter. One particular specimen is called Shandadar I, also known as Nandi. Now, what does he tell us? When we examined his skeleton, we find that he had massive blow to the head. A massive blow that it crushed his eye socket, leaving him partially blind. His hearing severely damaged by that blow. He had 2 broken legs and a possible amputation. Congenital disease with withered right arm. How good of a hunter would he be? Not much of a hunter. What would be the natural thing that you would think that the animals would do? Throw him away. But they didn't. Unable to provide for his family, he was looked after and lived well past the healing of his injuries. And we could look at his bones and say, okay, that bone was broken, it's now healed. Huh? So his family showed compassion and altruism, and possibly even, we don't know this for sure, earliest medical procedure. He lived to be between 40 and 50. Very good for the time. So you see what I'm saying? As a Neanderthal, he is not a grunting caveman, nor are the others. They cared for him when they should have thrown him away. Art and jewelry. They decorated their cave walls with pigments, feathers, art. And one author says they focused more on the abstract style. They were proto-Picassos. They created jewelry using what they had, which in this case is shells. And you have to say, where do you get shells from? Okay? There's no shells in the mountain. But other tribes, other peoples had shells. Human beings had shells. Okay? Drill a hole in the shell, you got an earring. Not my style, but it's an earring. I've seen worse, frankly, and you have too. Okay, so now we have 490 complete skeletons. And with the modern forensics, we can do reconstructions. What did they look like? And there's many similarities. Now granted, they're different. We're different. They had a thing called the FOXP2 gene, which is responsible for the ability to speak. Well, I don't know much about the FOXP2, but that's what I'm reading. They had a hyoid bone in the throat, okay, the hyoid. And that's what anchors the tongue. So that means they could speak. Their voices, it said, could be at a higher pitch, but yet they would still have voices. Their ears are tuned like modern humans. Had the innate ability for compassion, care for the aged, they buried their dead, and furthermore, they created rooms in their cave. You wall it off because you want to have one place in the cave to be maybe for cooking, another place for sleeping. They walled off their cave, and this is what happens. You go into the cave with forensics, and you begin to say, what is this all about? Have you ever been to Walnut Creek? Yeah. Oh, you should. There's a lot of neat places you need to see here in Arizona. We talked about the Grand Canyon. Great, interesting place. Painted desert, petrified forest. And not too far from the intersection of I-17 and I-40. You go down I-40 about 25 miles. You come to Walnut Creek. And Walnut Creek is a national monument now, but about about 1,000 years ago. The Anasazi Indians, the Sinagua, lived there. They lived in these caves. The caves were a natural formation, but they took advantage of these natural formations, and they made, as you can see, rooms, dwellings. And I remember walking into one, because you can walk into them, and I could still see the black wall from the char of the fireplace. So I could touch that wall. I can touch the charcoal, or the burnt area, the soot they had left behind. And that's how, well.
Our grandkids loved those because they were low. And they would run in there, and they were so fascinated with looking at these cave entrances, and like that one with the dark picture, the middle one. You know, I think that's one of the ones that had a room off of it. You know, like there was a hole in the wall, on that wall, and it went into another, another room. So it was really a cool thing for the grandkids to see.
Yeah. Now here's a strange thing about Walnut Creek. We visited there about 20 years ago.
Oh, you're going to tell them.
And it was a nothing trail. A little more than a mile, nothing. Kept going. And I don't know what they did to it in the last 20 years, but they made the hill a whole lot steeper. And now it's a challenge. we made it, obviously.
Well, it looks flat.
Yeah, it looks flat. Okay, no problem. We can do that. We can do that.
When we went 2 years ago with friends of our own age, where did the hills come from? I never remembered hills around that edge of that cliff. And it took us, I'll tell you what, we had to stop and puff a few times because it was hard to get. Now you go down the hill to get there. We knew that was the problem. And we knew we'd have to go back up, but I didn't expect the hills around the creek. And I thought, where did they come from? Did the earth move? And
now here's more about that. So you're going around, this thing makes a loop. And they had a park ranger interpreter. And on the trail, then you have a wall of rock. And she's holding on to the rock. And I'm saying, are you okay? She says, I'm afraid of height. Why are you a park ranger then? I'm afraid of height. I says, it's okay. I'll take your hand. Okay. Living in caves is really not that unusual. Rent's good. Okay. So, but most importantly of all, we share DNA with them. And that's the important part. Okay? We share DNA. And if you share DNA, okay, we looked at that before. If you share genes, you're the same species. Okay? You're the same species. All those dogs, different breeds, look different, same species. Okay? However, dogs and cats don't share genes. They are a different species. And we talked about that too. They cannot mate. Only if you have the same genes. In terms of chromosome number, chromosome kind, 23 and 23, of the correct kind, can you have fertile offspring. Dogs and cats, well, I don't care how friendly they are, they're never that friendly. So, this means that the Neanderthals were biblically human. This is where everybody out there is going to go crazy. Because of the sharing of the DNA, that makes them the same species, therefore they are biblically human. They're not way back in time. But then what are they? If they have biblical humanity, they share in the promise of salvation too. So how do we think about them? I think of them as a tribe, a parallel population, a parallel human population. So here's the thing, we noticed from the study in genetics that they did interbreed with Homo sapiens. We're Homo sapiens. We carry about 4% of Neanderthal DNA. Now, we have a lot of DNA which we don't actually use, but we carry it anyway. Now, because they could interbreed with Homo sapiens, that is what led to their extinction. Think about that. Many times a small population gets absorbed by a larger population and just simply gets absorbed. For example, if you were a Hasidic Jew, these are the ones that wear those big hats in Brooklyn, you would never allow your children to marry outside of your group. You want to keep your group together. It happens sometimes, and then say, you're dead to me. But same thing's true for in the Bible. The Jews were forbidden to marry Gentiles. Why? Because then you have a dilution of those genes. You spread it out, okay? We know a Mexican family who go back in their Mexicanness, probably as many generations as you can count, and they marry Mexican, marries Mexican, marries Mexican, until now. And their daughter wants to date white boys. The parents are okay with it. The grandparents are going crazy. What does that mean? If you date a white boy and you have children, now you're going to lead to that blending type of problem. The Amish do the same thing. The Sinagua did that. So when we talk about an extinction, we're talking about an absorption. It's not so much they died off, but they married off. Now, how many of us have ever gone online to Amazon.com? Amazon.com to find out your heritage.
You mean ancestry?
Oh, jeez. Ancestry. We all gone to Amazon.com. I'm talking about Ancestry.com. Ancestry. How many have done Ancestry? Okay, good. Well, I go and I think, okay, with a name like Landry coming from French Canada, I expect a lot of French. I have some French, obviously, but I also have English. And then it turns out I have a little bit of Jewish. I go vote. Who knew? Because of that, historically, you keep blending. People marry, they cross, villages interblend. Okay? And I'm sure your experience with Ancestry.com is similar. A blended background, right? Blended. Okay. Now, it comes as no surprise that we come in all shapes and sizes. And, you know, I'm not picking on either Tyrus, that's the guy on the left, nor on Senator Fetterman. This is not a political statement. But I just want to show you the difference in appearance. Okay? There's a big difference in appearance. And yet, one species. We come in many different versions. All right. If there's ever a saint that I like a lot, it's St. Augustine. I reference him a lot. He writes in the 5th century. He died, I think, around 436. Anyway, he wrote a book called The City of God. Big book. But in his big book, in his City of God, he talks about there being two cities. Two cities. There's a city of God and a city of man. And they're diametrically opposed to each other. City of God says, began shortly after the Garden of Eden in Abel. Began shortly after the city of Garden of Eden, Cain. Theism, atheism, members love God. Members spurn God. God is central. Man is central. Hold a classical biblical worldview. Hold a secular humanist worldview. Destiny, eternal kingdom under God. Destiny, eternal punishment with the devil. So how do you know what city you belong to? It boils down to this. You know what city a person is in by who they love. So, more about that. Traditional Bible-based Judeo-Christian says God-centered. There's a reality of the fall and salvation. Evil is real. Miracles have and can happen. Jesus is the second person of the Godhead. Creation ex nihilo by divine fiat. Remember, that was a problem. From nothing comes something by God saying so. We cannot save ourselves. It's not a do-it-yourself project. The Bible is God's word. Jesus truly rose from the dead, and a judgment awaits. Truth is absolute. You don't hear that. Truth is relative, right? So you go over here onto the secular humanism, man-centered. No fall. Okay, we didn't fall. Mankind is inherently good. Sin and evil don't exist. They are social constructs. Miracles can't happen. Jesus, even if he existed, is not divine. Ex nihilo by chance, okay? And we spoke a lot about this business about chance. There is no such thing as chance. Chance is not a cause of, it's not an agency. It doesn't happen by chance. Chance describes what has happened, but chance does not cause. Mankind can self-save. We can make ourselves better. We'll get there. Just give us enough time. We're going to get there. No resurrection. Instead, there's annihilation. Gone. Turn off the TV. You blink shut. Or universalism. And universalism says everybody in. Okay? Annihilation says there is no afterlife. Or you could say, yeah, there is an afterlife, but it doesn't matter. Everybody goes to be with God. Truth is relative. Okay? So you see the diametric opposition of these two worldviews that we have. That's what it all boils down to in my book. Truth, non-truth. I see it around all the time, and I'm sure you guys do too. Yeah, there's this constant tension between traditional, Judeo-Christian, Bible-based belief and secular humanism. Anyway, I want to ask one final question. Why does Porky not have any pants? Okay,